Welcome to a new video series called Industry Viewpoints, brought to you by the American Bankruptcy Institute. Each segment will feature an expert providing views on the current state of a particular industry with a focus on what may lie ahead. My guest on this edition is James D. Tussing, a partner with Norton Rose Fulbright in the firm's New York office. Jim is one of the country's leading authorities on aircraft leasing and finance. He represents both airlines alongside aircraft lessors and lenders. Jim, I know a year ago when life stopped and, I stopped flying just like you did and everybody else. My first thought was, oh my goodness, the travel industry. It's going to be in the dumper. And in particular, airlines, because who's going to want to fly? And then I remembered years ago, Jim, when you were very much involved in the bankruptcy of every airline on earth, and there were a lot of them in the last 20 years. So I thought, oh my goodness, this is just going to be horrendous for airlines and for people who finance and lease aircraft. So, Jim, my question for you is this. How has it gone in the last year? Is it as bad as we feared?
Well, as you know, I concentrate primarily on the financing and leasing side of the industry. And I think there's a pretty stark distinction to be drawn between the leasing industry and the airline industry. The airline industry would have collapsed in many cases were it not for massive government support around the globe. Because as your listeners will know, obviously travel is way down and has pretty much been a non-activity in some parts of the world from time to time. That said, the leasing industry is very distinct from the airline industry. It's not received any government support. It's primarily funded by private equity firms and other institutional funds. In some cases, the leasing companies are publicly traded, and they have held up surprisingly well. They tend to have a much stronger balance sheet and credit rating than airlines. They've been successful in raising significant funds, in some cases multi-billion-dollar unsecured financings during the pandemic. And what they have been doing with the disaster in the airline industry is working with the airlines to defer payments and other restructurings of leases and financings. In fact, there have even been some positive opportunities for the leasing companies. They now constitute about 1/2 of the order books with the major aircraft manufacturers. They're very important customers of those manufacturers who are very competitive with each other. So no doubt they'll be able to have increased leverage with the manufacturers in their purchases of aircraft. And they have started undertaking sale-leaseback, so-called, with the airlines, where they will buy an airplane that often is under a purchase order from the airline with the manufacturer. They'll step in, they'll buy that airplane and lease it back to the airline. And that can be an important source of funding for the airline. So, of course, there have been negative effects. There's no doubt about that. Lease rates have gone down. Airlines around the world are operating at a fraction of their normal capacity. So don't get me wrong. Of course, there have been negative results. But overall, I would say that the leasing companies and the leasing and financing industry have held up surprisingly well during this pandemic.
Jim, do any aircraft leasing or finance companies operate by principally providing aircraft for U.S. airlines, or are they all diversified around the world?
It's a very global industry. That's part of what attracted the financing sources of these leasing companies in the first place. It's very much a global industry. The typical portfolio of a leasing company is very diversified in terms of regions around the world and airline customers, which of course, obviously in more ordinary times, and to some extent even now, helps spread the risk around.
Well, so far, have there been any defaults by any major leasing or finance companies?
No, there have been some. Interestingly, there has been some very significant consolidation. Your readers are probably aware that GE has is in the process of merging its leasing company, so-called GCAS, GE Aviation, with another very large leasing company, AerCap, which will combine portfolios of thousands of aircraft in a transaction that's worth, if my memory serves me correctly, in the 30s of billions. So there has been some consolidation, but I think that that's somewhat opportunistic to somewhat take advantage of some of the opportunities that those leasing companies have, because the bigger they are, the more customers they have, the more leverage they have, both with the manufacturers and with the airlines.
Well, let me ask you this. I remember in the last round of airline bankruptcies that leasing companies were eager, or finance companies were eager to take back the aircraft. Have they taken back many aircraft so far, even when there's defaults?
There have been far fewer returns of equipment than would normally occur when there are defaults. The reason being they don't have any place to release them in many cases. So their best option is restructuring a deal with their current owner in many cases, their current user, I should say, excuse me.
And by any chance, if they restructure defaulted deals, are any of these financing entities going to be interested in taking back, let's say, equity or the equivalent?
Yes, that has started occurring, most notably in the Norwegian Air bankruptcy in Ireland, where the leasing companies have taken equity in the post-bankruptcy airline in return for rent concessions for the aircraft.
I see. Well, this all happened at an unfortunate time, especially for Boeing, because of the safety problems with the 737 MAXs. And I gather there must be several hundred of them sitting around on the ground awaiting delivery. Is the overhang of those undelivered MAXs having an effect on the aircraft market?
That's a complicated question. The answer is yes. That obviously airlines have had to hold on to this, and it's not particularly a pandemic question, although obviously the pandemic affects it. But the airlines have had to continue to operate aircraft that they intended to retire because they haven't gotten those newer aircraft. But reality is most of the larger airlines who had significant orders with Boeing have still have those orders. They've been restructured, and they're starting to take deliveries.
I see. Well, listen, I have one last question for you with regard to the MAXs. Will the efficiency of those aircraft for the airlines make up for fear of the riding public to get on those aircraft?
My experience is that the riding public will soon forget their current concerns about safety associated with that aircraft once the aircraft is in use and being operated widely.
Wow. Jim, this is all fascinating. I wish we had at least an hour to talk about this, because this just really gets my juices going. I appreciate what you said. And Jim, I thank you for your enlightening analysis and your thoughts of the future of those who lease, finance, and fly aircraft. We look forward to seeing how the industry fares in the next couple of years. Airline and aircraft finance will be fodder for upcoming ABI events and publications. To find out, have a look at abi.org for the latest updates. And thank you for tuning in. In Industry Viewpoints series in upcoming days and weeks, we will talk with other experts about the future of industries that are affected by our turbulent economic times. Until then, be well and stay safe.